Welcome to Sticky, Stories That Stick. Join me, Amelia Forzak, as I sit down with master storytellers to explore what makes some narratives unforgettable. Let's get started. Hi, I'm Amelia Forzak. If you're interested in storytelling or you just want to hear good stories, you're in the right spot. Today, I have a very interesting guest with us. But first, I just have to let you know that this episode is brought to you by Pithy Wordsmithery, a boutique firm founded by yours truly. I'm a New York Times bestselling ghostwriter, and I love helping people write and publish their books. My team and I have helped many authors turn their stories into bestsellers and their brands into thought leadership platforms. If you've ever thought about writing a book, check us out online at pithywordsmithery.com. Today, I have Alan Gregerman with me. Alan is President and Chief Innovation Officer at VentureWorks, Inc., a consulting firm that helps leading companies and leaders around the world unlock the genius in all of their people as the real key to remaining relevant, avoiding disruption, and delivering bottom-line results. He is also the author of 4 award-winning and best-selling books on innovation, including his new book, The Wisdom of Ignorance, which I have with me right here. Alan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, greetings. Well, thanks for having me on. Delighted to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, we met recently at the Book Thinkers Conference in Boston, and it's so nice. I know you were sitting at my table, and I love that we have a better opportunity to chat today.
Yeah, no, that was fun. I mean, it was a great conference for me only because, well, for a lot of reasons, but one is because it was like a new generation of folks who are involved in books, and so I need to stay relevant. You know, I write about being relevant, and so it's important to me. And I learned a lot of new things because I'm not from the social media world. And so I'm excited to be smarter about it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, so that conference was about book marketing, and you've written 4 books. So you must know a thing or two about book marketing.
I think I know something about book marketing, but book marketing is like a moving kind of target all the time. So the reality is I wrote my first book like 24 years ago, and book marketing was really different then.
Yeah.
And then with each book, it becomes a bit different. And now we're really in a social media age in which actually understanding how to let the social media universe really help to promote your book is really vital.
Yeah, I can see actually how the topic of your latest book really comes into play here, because The Wisdom of Ignorance talks about why it's okay to not know everything and how that can be an advantage. So applying that to book marketing, I can see how that works.
Well, I think, yes. So if you think about the fact that, you know, The Wisdom of Ignorance is about the idea that in a world moving really fast, we always have to learn new skills. And we also should admit that we don't always know the answers. And so for me, I rarely know the answers. Folks often say, so Alan, you have like a PhD. And I go, yeah, but I'm like an expert in not knowing stuff. And so the reality is you always have to learn new things and up your game and figure out how to promote a book or get in front of people. And that's actually part of the excitement of it for me.
That's awesome. Okay, so how did you get the idea for this book, which I think, by the way, is brilliant? And I have heard this before and it stuck with me. And I always need to remind myself of that when I feel like I'm faced with something hard, where I'm like, it's okay that I don't know everything. It's actually good. But how did you come up with this as like an idea for a whole book?
Well, so think about my field is innovation. And so I've been writing about and thinking about innovation for a long time. And so I'm regularly trying to think about how I get people who are in the midst of trying to innovate to think differently about how to do it. And so over the last several years, what's been clear to me is most companies or organizations who are my target, they don't really know how to innovate. And they don't know how to innovate because they rely on their own expertise. And they believe that knowing a lot is the key to success. And what I noticed was the more I know about something, the more I can make it better. But the less I know about it, the more likely I am to create a breakthrough. Because I approach it with like fresh eyes, just like anyone should approach any project. And that is, what's the full potential of what I'm doing? And so I started to think more and more about this idea of how do I get people to be comfortable with not knowing and then willing to use not knowing as really the starting point for being awesomely kind of clever and figuring it out. You know, and I think life and business is about figuring it out. not about
Mhm.
being wedded to what we know.
Yeah. That's so tricky. So how do you get companies to realize that ignorance actually is a good thing? Because you're right. People always want to bring in the experts and have the experts guide everything, and they aren't looking at it from the same perspective as someone who doesn't know anything.
Yeah, but think about this. So I start and I say, look, the world is going to be really different 5 years from now than it is today. It actually is really different today than it was 5 years before. And so when I say to folks, so think about that, is there anyone who really knows exactly where the world is going to be 5 years from now? And then they go, well, probably not. And so I then say, so let's commit that we'll go on a journey together to figure out where the future is going. Now, there are clues to the future all around us. And so I begin by saying to people, let's go and pay attention to what's changing in the world around us, and then try to imagine how those changes will build and build and build and make the world different. And then be open to the fact that I exactly don't know what I need to know now. So I might as well be open minded about it.
Hmm. Yeah, that's such a good point. You have some examples in the beginning here about how when humans, like early civilization, we were people who had to figure things out, right? Before there was the internet and you could just look things up, everybody kind of had to like stumble through the process and learn and be beginners and all kinds of things like that. And we were sort of in that mode more then than now.
Oh, well, I think we're in that mode now. I think we're in that mode throughout the whole course of human history, but it's more obvious as we look back. So you're in Chicago, it's cold there in winter. Somebody in a cold place a long time ago said, we've got to figure out how to get warmer. And so they created a lot of different things to do. They may have made wool blankets. They may have invented fire, which is a pretty useful thing to know, but they had to figure it out in order to survive. We might not think today that we need to figure things out to survive, but we need to figure new things out. You know, think about social media, think about podcasts. They're relatively new things. We have to figure out how to use those to our advantage. So I believe throughout history, people figure things out. They don't know the answer. They go, I need to figure this out. I'm going to do that. And that just happens over time. And so I think it should be just a rule of being human, because even as individuals, we come into experiences where we've never had that before. And in order to get the most out of it, we have to figure that out as well.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it can feel, in your book, you talk about how sometimes it feels a little uncomfortable still, because once you get into a place where you feel a little cozy, you're like, I don't need to figure all the things out. You sort of get in this like little stuck place, but being in a place where you feel a little stuck is not a good spot to be in when things are changing so quickly and you need to keep leveling up.
Well, it's human. No, so that's a great point. It's human nature. I won't say to get stuck, though you're exactly right. I'll say it's human nature to get good at something and then say, I'm going to rely on that. You know, I now have mastered this. I feel I'm really quite skillful at this. And then all of a sudden the world changes and we need to learn something new. It's human nature to get stuck in kind of what we offer in our businesses or organizations. It's human nature to get stuck in, I have a certain way of writing things that I think is going to resonate with people. But people out there change. It's human nature to say, I'm generally happy with my friendships. I'm going to kind of be okay with that. But the reality is, all these things keep evolving and changing. So I can't allow myself to get stuck. I can say, I'm really good at this. Let me keep building on that, but I got to keep getting better at that.
And it is like it is tricky for people doing that. So if you what's your advice for somebody if they feel stuck either creatively or professionally? How can they intentionally use ignorance to get unstuck?
Well, so I'm kind of biased. I actually, as a fun, odd fact, I actually have a PhD in urban geography. And so I spend my time wandering around cities. You'll appreciate, because you're in Chicago, I used to give walking tours of Chicago as a
I
way to pay to
love
go to
that.
college.
I could see you being so good at that.
Well, I don't know if I was good at it. I enjoyed it. I know people seem to like it, but the reality is, I think what people don't do is they don't open up their lens to being open to other ideas. So here's like a life hack that I use that seems to work well, and that is, think about if you're writing and you're getting stuck, or you're at your computer, not a typewriter, or think if you're at work and you're getting stuck in something. Get up, go out, wander around, and pay attention. Do I have somewhere here? Wait. Um, I give people these little tiny notebooks here, and I say, here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to wander around Chicago or go to a park you like or wherever your listeners are, and simply put your phone away. And every time you see something that's remarkable to you, write it down in this little book. Because the world is filled with remarkable things, and some of those remarkable things are going to change the way that we think about stuff. You see a new restaurant, you see a new play at a theater, you see, any type of new business, you see people performing in the street, you see street art, whatever the case is. And I say, just be open to the fact that there's lots of remarkable stuff beyond what you already know out there, and use that to kind of get yourself energized. If you're trying to write a book, read a lot of books, and not just the books that are in your genre. Read other types of books just to get a sense of kind of how artists or writers engage the world. But we have to periodically kind of get up and say to ourselves, there's more than what I know out here, and I need to be excited about it. I like to wander, and I don't know whether it's because I have ADD or some other combination of letters, but I really like to wander around, because wandering around, I don't know what I'm going to find, and it gives me some fresh ideas. And so for me, that's all part of the process of staying engaged, staying relevant, knowing what's going on, and stretching my thinking.
Such great advice. How will you find innovation if you don't have any inspiration, right? So actively going out there, exposing yourself to new things. I think so many of us could benefit from that.
Well, think about it in all aspects of our life. So we're hanging out, and if we're in a cold place, we're less likely to go outside. And the world is changing right outside our windows, and we ought to get out there. I'm a big fan of, speaking of writing, a fellow named Jules Verne, who was a French writer and thought of maybe not the father of science fiction, but an early science fiction writer. And so Jules Verne wrote 80 books about all kinds of things. He imagined the future. He imagined submarines. He imagined spaceships. He imagined an early form of the internet. How did he do this? Because he didn't have access to the internet. He did this by doing two things. One was he spent a lot of time at the library, the main library in Paris, reading a lot of stuff. And the other was he walked up and down the streets of Paris looking for clues as to where the world was going. I believe we can do the same thing. We might not write 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, but we can do the same thing by just getting out and paying attention. The more experiences we have, the more we get out, the more we widen our lens about what's possible, and the more we can apply those ideas to whatever matters to us.
I love that. That's such good advice for any aspiring author who's listening. Some of it could just be going and writing in a new spot, going to the library, going to a coffee shop, going to a new business or a park, and sitting there and writing instead of just being at your desk.
Oh, I think so. If you change where you are, you change your perspective. And so I think that's super important to do. Whatever way you change, I want people to get new stimuli, new ideas, new possibilities. I want them to talk to new people. I go up to people, which is interesting because I'm actually relatively introverted. I just start talking to people. What are you up to? Why do you do that? And so I think the more we can do that, the better it is. I know I find when I write, the more I decide to go to some different places at different times in the writing process, depending on what I'm writing about, the more I'm likely to have a breakthrough or clear my mind or get the other stuff I don't want in my mind out, and then find new stuff to bring in.
Yeah. I'd love to hear more about your writing process. So you've written 4 books, which is a huge accomplishment. And I'm halfway through this one right now, the newest. It is so good. Really. I like it a lot.
Well, you're too kind. So my writing, and again, for people who are listening, I think your writing process evolves, and you're like a professional writer. So my guess is, you know what you're doing, but my guess is you're always honing your craft and getting better. I'm not a professional writer. My books actually sound like me. You know, I can tell you the first time I wrote a book and sent it in to my editor at McGraw Hill, they said, "Oh, God, do you know any of the rules of grammar?" And I go, "Well, I don't know." And then I think the most painful thing I think for most writers is not the content editor, because they assume for the most part that you know your stuff and they can say, put this here, put that there, organize it this way. But when the copy editor looks at your stuff and then you get a manuscript back with like hundreds, or maybe in my case, like 2,500, like, this is grammatically wrong. And I go, well, that's how I speak. Then at first you're aghast. But my right,
the copy editing is like, that's their job. I always tell people not to worry about that, right? Like the
oh,
commas.
well, I needed you to be my advisor then, because I was just going, oh my God, do I have to respond to all of these things?
Yeah. I published my first book with McGraw Hill too. And I had all those come back. So I know exactly what you're talking about. And at this point, I tell authors, it doesn't matter. Your sentence structure doesn't matter. Your grammar doesn't matter. Punctuation doesn't matter. Get the good content in there, get it in the right spot. That's what matters. That's what you're good at. I don't know about your punctuation, but you're telling a story. I can follow you. It's interesting. That's what you need.
Oh, well, you're being kind. I wish I had kind of known you earlier in my writing career. So here's what I've learned, as I think about my writing process, and I don't know if this will be helpful to folks, but I think the problem is early on we get stuck. We want to write every word we write, we want it to be perfect. I remember a bunch of folks maybe who are listening remember a cartoonist named Gary Larson and The Far Side. And so he had a cartoon, and the cartoon said on the top, young Herman Melville has writer's block. And then it said, call me Fred, call me Tom, call me Tony, call me Bill. And then after like 50 of these, it said, call me Ishmael. And then he goes, oh, aha, I can start Moby Dick now. Well, the reality is, just as Amelia said, you can't get stuck on anything, okay? And so here's what I do, and that is I come up with an outline for a book. Like, I think that these are like going to be the 9 chapters of my book. And I actually, in old school way, I make a file folder for each of these 9 chapters, and then I just write something, okay? And I write a really awful draft of those 9 chapters. But I then can say to myself, gee, I have the first draft of my book, because it's way easier to correct stuff than it is to write stuff, So I don't know. I mean, Amelia, you could probably write a book in like 10 minutes. I don't know. You're like a professional. I'm like an amateur writer. It's not my main thing, but
you are not an amateur writer. Okay. So like you've written 4 books and you make money from them. I feel like you could call yourself a professional writer.
Oh, well, you're being nice. Okay, so I write these drafts, and now I have on my desk like 9 file folders filled with stuff. I feel like I've done part of the work, because it's way easier to make things better than it is to start right away. Now I start to go back, and then I start to look at these, and I say to myself, okay, is this really accomplishing what it needs to accomplish? And I have a simple formula for what I'm trying to do. And the simple formula is I want to say something early on. Now, granted, I'm a nonfiction writer, but I want to say something up front that gets people to go, whoa, that's kind of counterintuitive or different. Maybe I should pay attention to this. Then I want to spend a fair amount of time convincing them that it's actually right. So I have to do some research. And then after I've done that, I have to say, okay, now I need to show them there's a path forward and there's a formula for doing things the right way. And so that's what I want to write about. And then I need to have like fireworks go off at the end, like, you can do this. I need to be encouraging to people. But so I'm thinking about that. I'm writing stuff. I'm putting it in folders. Then I'm going back and I'm honing it and making it better. And so that for me is the process, because I think too many folks, and I know with my first book, I spent forever writing this book. And it's because I wanted every word to be perfect. I don't care initially if the words are perfect. I hope they're pretty good by the end, but I'm going to get to that later. I don't want to get stuck because I want to get as many ideas as I can out and then I'll make them better. And so
Yeah.
that's where I am now. And that makes it kind of easier. The other thing I would tell people is write about something you're excited about, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So you wake up each day and you go, this is really cool. And I have another idea related to this. And I want to make it better and better. So that really helps. If it just becomes like a research project and it's okay and it gets tedious, writing a book, I think, is not like a doctoral dissertation, where you
Yeah. You said a couple really interesting things. First of all, the way that you structure the content is exactly how I do it too. And so for the people listening, this structure has been used. I've got 18 books. Alan has
oh, well,
more. This has been tested. Maybe go back and listen to that part again because that is exactly how you structure your chapters. Um, the the way that you're doing it to not get stuck is also genius because that's the thing that causes issues emotionally for people and from a time standpoint. So if you start to feel like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing, I can't do this, it feels big and heavy. And it's probably like not that big of a deal. You're probably stuck on one paragraph out of hundreds. And so if you just skip it, just keep going. Like an editor can help you with it. Like if you can get it to like 80% good, even 70% good, you can have someone help you with that. So if you just like get it further along and just keep moving, that's like all you really need to do.
okay. Well, I love that. So I didn't know what I was doing, and you're like an expert. So I'm glad to have some verification. Yeah. So I think the outline is vitally important. So if I was going to spend a lot of time, and I have an idea for another book now, but I focus on making sure that I'm pretty comfortable with the outline and where the book is going. And then it's like, let me make sure for each of the elements of the outline, I've written something that's competent, that all starts to fit together. The other thing I would say, and this was hard for me at first, and that's where I appreciate your guidance about that we all have copy editors at some point, and that's their job, is you have to find your own voice. So my voice is me talking, okay? And I think that's okay. Some people's voice is not them talking, but it's a more formal or organized. And once I got to that point, I could say to editors, because my first three books were all big publishers, I could just say, this is me, this is how I write, and I want to do. And what was really exciting to me is this book, The Wisdom of Ignorance. This is the first book I've done the audiobook in. And so it's my
I
voice.
love that.
And to be able to actually read my own book and actually hear myself talking, it's like what I would say, made me actually reasonably happy about doing that.
Aw.
But so find your voice, have an outline, don't get stuck. You have plenty of time to get stuck. Like I would say you could get stuck at the end. Like I spend a lot of time on the endings because that's like the big hurrah, like go do something. And so I'm okay with that. But at the ending, you have more time and energy for kind of getting the words right. The rest of the words, you'll figure you with an editor or a writing partner, you'll figure it out.
Yeah. I 100% agree on the outline. I never work on a book unless I feel good about the outline. And once you have that, start at the easiest part. I usually start in the middle. I write the beginning and the end of the book last because they're the hardest. And you don't want to start with that because it's frustrating. So you want to start with something that's going to make you feel good and give you easy momentum, which is usually the middle. And so I start plugging that stuff in. And then by the time I get to the end, I have a better idea of what the whole book looks like as like big picture. Even though I did the outline, it's just more clear when I have the whole thing written. And then the beginning and the ending are they're better. If I start with those from the beginning, I end up rewriting them.
Right.
So yeah, doing it at the end is really good. And then you were talking about voice and how it should sound like the way that you talk. That is 100% what someone's actual voice is, right? And so
Right.
people get a little confused by that. And somehow when people are writing, they want it to come out sounding a little more polished, a little more professional. And that is how people get stuck sometimes. And if you start to think too much like that, it's just not great. And so what I recommend for people, I don't know if you've ever tried this, is doing talk to text or plugging in an AI like Otter or something and just
Right.
speaking, like telling the story like you're talking to a friend, pulling the transcript from there, and then that sounds like you. So you can polish it up a little bit from that, but that gets your words on paper and it sounds like you.
Good. No. And I think, we were talking a little while ago about the idea that things change. And so I think talk to text is one of the things that's changed over the last few years.
Yeah.
And I think for an awful lot. So, but go back to armed with your outline. Now you can say to yourself, if I want to fill these 9 file folders, I'm going to go through the outline and I'm going to talk about each section. I'm assuming that most of the people listening or who are writing books know a fair amount about their subject. And so now what I want to do is I'm going to go through the outline and I'm going to talk and I'm going to put a few pages in my file folder based on what I talked about. Of course, I'm going to make it better, but that allows me to quickly get those folders filled. And those folders filled makes me feel like I have a draft of the whole book. And I feel like also, I have to admit, I love it when somebody comes up after a talk and they say, I read your book and you sound just like your book. And I go, well, I don't know. I wrote the book. It's kind of meant to be. And I don't use, there's a lot of writing and talking about people who are using AI. I don't have a single word in anything I've ever written that's AI. I even write all of my social media posts by myself because I want them to be in my voice. But I do like the technology of being able to say some stuff and it gets printed. Then I look at it and say, is this okay? The other thing I like a lot is, and it may be I might be kind of inclined more to this than other people, is my book, in a way, if you cut through it, is a collection of stories all trying to get people to a point. And I feel like when we write about stories that matter to us, we get more energy about it. So when I'm saying to myself that I'm going to think a little bit about ancient Greece and why the Greeks aren't as relevant as they could be today, and they were like really the rock stars of kind of the past, um, I'm going to spend a lot of time thinking about that because that's really fun for me to think about. When I write a story about Apple or another company, or there's a story in the book about a unique way to treat mental health called the Friendship Bench, which started in Zimbabwe. I get all into this and I'm excited to kind of tell a story. And I feel like every book is like a bunch of mini writing and thinkings that all come together in this outline to be something that matters.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. And if you chunk it down like that, it becomes a lot more manageable and you can have little bite-sized bits of homework. Or if you have the outline and you know what you're going to talk about, where it's going to go, why it matters, the stories are the how. How are you going to explain it? How are you going to make your point? And those are the little nuggets that you can fill in. And if you have 20 minutes, knock that story out and then you're making progress on the book.
Good. And that also gets to something, and I don't know if you've covered it um, in detail before, but I feel like, and maybe it's just me, is I'm better at writing certain times of the day.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm like a morning person. And if I had several cups of coffee, I'm like really a morning person.
Mhm.
But I feel like figure out when you're most creative or most on and use that time to actually do your writing and use the other time when you're not as efficient or organized or brilliant and do some homework or prepping or working on the outline or thinking about what are the things you want to convey in a story that really matter. And so doing that, so I find, from 8 in the morning to 11 in the morning, I'm modestly clever. And so that's when I'm going to focus on writing. I can
Yeah.
review things at other times of the day. But
Yeah.
and it's tied to, you were mentioning a little while ago the idea of maybe change your environment. Find places and times where you're at your best and don't think about, I don't know, maybe because you're so good at what you do, maybe you can write at all hours of the day. I feel
Well,
like I have a few hours a day when I can be good.
no, me too. I was going to say that you had mentioned like ADD. I am also ADD. And so I am, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs are as well. And just like successful people, a lot of successful people have that. And I'm definitely like, I'm an Adderall and coffee morning person. And that is when I do my best writing and I get the things done in the morning. Like, don't ask me to do anything at like 7 o'clock at night. It's not happening. Like, I might organize a drawer, but there's no way I'm like working on a chapter. So, like,
Right.
if you get to a point where you feel like it's a battle, stop. You're at the
Right.
wrong, you're not in the vibe. Like, wait until it feels like it can flow. And then that's the thing you work on then.
Good. And that, no, I appreciate that. And that's like a great thing for people to understand is it's okay to say this afternoon or today is not a writing day for me. I'm going to do other stuff. Is because people who are going to read your book, they deserve to get the best of you. And so, but you've got to decide when you're at your best and when you can offer your best to folks. And so I think that's okay. Now, I realize some people, they have like a deadline or they've got to crunch things out. I've never had, because I run a consulting business, I've never had a deadline. And I mean, a publisher says, you need the manuscript by this time for it to get out at this time. So that's all good. But otherwise, I don't think of myself as having a deadline. I go, I'm really feeling awesome today. I think I'm going to write, or I'm going to take the dogs for a walk and
Yeah.
not write today. Yeah.
That's
So I think,
That's
but I
great.
think,
Deadlines help. I have a journalism degree, and so like I
okay.
feel like I've always been like motivated by deadlines.
Right.
And even my first book with McGraw Hill, it was like it's due at this time, and so I just work backwards. I'm like, okay, I have 65,000 words that are due by this date. Let me set them up into mini deadlines because I have to turn in half the manuscript at this
Right.
point. And then from there, I've just like realized that if I don't have a deadline, it just hangs in space for me. And so
Right.
for our authors at Pithy Wordsmithery, we even put them on a schedule where they owe us chapters. If they're writing their own book, they owe us one chapter a week. And if it's on time, they get money back. If
Oh,
it's written well and it's on time, because people need motivation, right?
oh no, I think people do. Yeah. So I think whatever motivates you, I think is really, really good. And no, I like the idea of for me, a deadline is the only way I'm going to make stuff happen. But at the same time, I need to recognize that if it's not my day to write, I shouldn't be writing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm sure there are people who write and they're like clever every day, like Stephen King. I'm sure he just sits down at his computer and keeps telling stories. I mean, that's the advantage of a story, right? And so for me, my books are collections of stories. And so it's easier to write a story because I'm by nature a bit of a storyteller. So the ability to put those down in words is really fun for me to do.
Yeah.
And I would, if what you write about lends itself to stories, whether they're your own stories or stories about somebody else, that's kind of nice because then it seems to flow. Then I can just sit down and get a really good draft of something. It's when I have to then say, okay, what are the 5 lessons here? Then I scratch out the 5 lessons. Then I have to write something that's, I hope not dry, but a little bit drier than a story. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about how like it needs to be fun. You need to enjoy the process. If you want to come back and write and it's like pleasurable, that's how it's going to go well. And so that's really like what we're aiming for with books is picking a topic that you're passionate about that you can be interested in and then along the way, how do we make it interesting? And a lot of times I think that's like how do we interview people that you want to talk to anyway, that you've been looking for an excuse to get in contact with this person? Or how do we uncover new stories so that the process of getting the stories and getting them down on paper is rewarding?
Right. Oh, yeah. No, and I love the idea you mentioned that it's got to be fun because let's be honest, writing a book can be a bit of, unless you have a partner, can be a bit of a solitary activity. And so you've got to enjoy it. And then the other thing that I think a lot of writers don't think about, and I didn't think about it with my first book, was you write the book and then you're kind of responsible for getting the world to know about it. So publishers say that they're going to help you. They don't do a lot. So you hire a publicist. They're good or less good, but you've got to ultimately get out there and be the advocate for your book. You've got to show up, talk about it, get it in front of the right people's hands. So you've got to be super energized to do that. And so it needs to be something you're really excited about. Otherwise, you're just going to run out of steam. And so you want to pick a topic that you say, this is really valuable to folks. More people need to hear about it. And I want to be the messenger because you're the primary messenger of getting people to buy your book.
That's such a good point, and it's something that most authors don't realize. They want to get that publishing deal because they think, oh, then it'll be easy. Then it will be someone else's job to market the book. But no, unfortunately, that's not the case.
Well, no, and I think I don't think most authors also realize, and you've had best-selling books, is it's hard to have a best-selling book, and most books, even if they're wonderful books, don't sell a lot, and so we have to do an awful lot to get people to know about our books, and I think there's so many skills, I guess, or different mindsets that are required to be successful as an author. You got to be really organized. You got to be able to find a good idea. You got to be excited about it. You got to write well, but it's got to be your voice. You got to then get people interested in your book. And I think most people, if you spend so much time writing your book, you can be exhausted by the time. And you just say, well, why isn't it selling? And you look at Amazon every day, and you have some days when it's selling and other days it's not selling, and you go, God, what am I doing wrong here? But yeah, it's a lot of stuff you've got to do, and you've got to be kind
Yeah.
of vested in either doing or finding partners to help you with each part of it. But you got to love what you've written about, because otherwise none of the other stuff's going to happen.
Yeah. And I always tell authors, we work with nonfiction authors as well. And most people who are using the book as a thought leadership piece, where they have other services or products that are tied to that topic. So maybe they do professional speaking or consulting, or they have, something like that. And so I always remind authors that it's not just about selling copies of the book. You're really doing this as like a bigger picture thing for your own personal brand. And so that could even mean like you want to get on more public boards, or you want to start your own advisory service, or you want to charge more for certain, like consulting services. If you're able to get more momentum with what you want to do for other things that light you up, and the book helps with that, that's the bigger picture goal other than just selling the copies.
Great. No, I think that's great advice. And my view always is, I don't need everybody to read my book, but I'd like a lot of the right people to read my book. And so those are the folks that are going to invite me to speak, hire me as a consultant, share my book with other folks that they think might find it interesting. So those people are really important. And just the fact that somebody in Montana bought my book, I appreciate everyone who buys my book, but that's not my goal. I don't need to sell 100,000 copies of a book to feel as though it's been successful.
Yeah.
And, I think for some of the people who are thinking about writing a book, also don't think about that you're just going to write one book, that you only have ideas for one book. I talk to so many authors and they say, well, I wrote this book. I don't have the energy for another book. And I go, well, again, the world is changing. You need to keep putting ideas out there for you to remain relevant. And so books help people to see that you're paying attention to what's going on. And again, I'm just hoping if I get in the course of a week a few people who call and say, we'd love you to speak, that's probably better than several thousand people buying my book. I mean, ego wise, I'd love several thousand people that week to buy my book, but I have an idea of it. Then the other thing, that I think is fun too is a book can get you in front of new audiences. And whether those audiences are, different groups of people with different interests, or I'm kind of keen, my books have been translated into like 18 different languages. Now,
Wow.
now more today, it's harder to get books translated because people buy an English book, whether they read English or not, they want to make it seem like they're good at English. So I guess we got lucky and won with English. But I like the fact, like when my books are translated into Japanese, I have no idea if they've done a good job translating, but I feel like, oh, people are getting access to my ideas in other places in a language that's their first language that they're most comfortable in. So that's fun for me. And
That's
so,
amazing.
and if they invite me to speak in those places, that's fun for me too. But yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, so you book one speaking engagement, and then that does bring you in front of hundreds of people potentially in the audience who could buy your book, or you package it so that when you book the speaking, everybody in the audience gets a copy of the book and you do a book signing. And so it is just sort of a different way of looking at it. Instead of like a one-off sale, a speaking engagement is a bulk sale.
Oh, you're exactly right. And then I do a few things. I shouldn't give away my competitive
Tell us
secrets, but
everything.
um, I actually sign all the copies of my book that ever touch my hands. So, as an example, here's one that I've signed to Martin, and I'm going to give it to him. But a company or organization could hire me to speak, and they say, we'd like 300 copies of your book. And of course, they say, we'd like copies of the book. And a lot of times they say, should we just order it online or through your publisher or whatever? And I say, actually not. Here's the price I'll give you. And I will sign and personalize all of these copies of the book, and we'll bring them. And then if people want, it's easy for me to just add their names, Amelia, Martin, Susan, whoever, at the place. It goes by really quickly. But I want people to have a personal connection with me. Oh, I hope I signed
You
yours.
sure
Yeah.
did. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah. And so I do that. Um, and the reality is, it's fun for me because I feel like I'm connecting. I say, send me a list of all the people, or if not, I'll get their names when I come there. And then I either in the morning with coffee or in the evening with I don't know, an IPA or a glass of wine. I just put on some music and I just sign books and write inscriptions. My last book, I calculated that I had signed or written a message in like 13,000 copies of that book.
Wow.
And so, yeah, so no, so I think it's like a good thing. It makes it certainly more personal. So I'm always trying to do that. You always want to make a connection with your readers if you can, and it's not that easy to do. The other thing you mentioned, which is really important for those people listening who speaking is part of what they do, is you want to think of every talk as potentially leading to 3 or 4 more other talks. And so
Mm.
that's why if you're early in the game and somebody says, can you speak to our book group or can you speak to the association? We only have a budget to buy your books. You say, perfect. I'm willing to do that because I know that the audience is going to be people that potentially could hire me to come and do speaking. And I feel also that any group that would like you to speak, I speak at book groups. I have notes like discussion guide for all of my books for book groups. Um, I'm willing to talk with everyone because I want to see their reaction and I want to practice my material. I want to see which of the things in the book resonate more with people, and then I'm going to talk about those things more. But I like to be in front of people. Remember, anyone you talk with could be an advocate. My last book was called The Necessity of Strangers, and it had a fundamentally simple idea, and that was that each day we pass 100 people who could change our lives, but we never connect with them. And so I don't want that to happen. I want to connect with as many of these 100 people as I can, because I don't know, serendipity could lead me to connecting with somebody who creates a big opportunity for me or for my book.
That's such great advice for anyone, aspiring authors, leaders, entrepreneurs. And I remember you said you're an introvert. So even more admirable coming from an introvert because gosh, that sounds hard for a lot of people, right?
Well, I write about it. And so clearly I've figured out, but you have to train yourself, right? So I have a nice office or kind of cave that I spend a lot of time in. And then when I know that I'm giving a speech or I'm going to a networking event, it doesn't come naturally to me to just connect with people. So I have to really kind of rev myself up or get energized to do it, or learn some techniques. You could be an introvert and still connect with people. Just figure out the way that you're comfortable, so you're not going to start walking up to people, shaking their hands and go, hey, awesome, how are you? I'm Alan. But I might sit next to somebody at a conference or an event, and I might just say, what brings you here? Whether you're introvert or not, you can have a conversation with another person. And so I figure out the way to start a conversation that then leads me to kind of learning more about them and what matters to them. So I think there are ways to do that, but I don't know. Are there a lot of authors who are like really extroverted people? Because writing is a kind of introverted activity.
Yeah, you're right. Most of the people that I work with aren't professional writers and don't necessarily identify like that. And so the writing is probably the thing that's a little bit harder for them. But we do have thought leaders who are introverts. We've got people who are like they want to speak, but it's a learned skill for them, right? A lot of times at this point in their career they figured it out, but it was harder for them when they were younger.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like to think I had to teach myself how to be a writer, and I had to teach myself how to be a speaker. And now they both come more naturally to me, but it's not like day one I was like awesome at either of them. Day one with writing, it's like, how do I get started? It's like, call me Ishmael. And then, day one with speaking, it's like, oh my God, who are all these people? This is hard. And now I'm just excited to share like the ideas I have both in written form and then in speaking form. But I think it's everything as we get better and better at it, unless we have a natural kind of proclivity to it. And that's
Mhm.
okay. It's kind of part of the fun of figuring out. I can
Yeah.
tell you the first time I went on stage and I wasn't nervous at all because I'd figured out a bunch of tricks, which we could have another episode about. But um, I was like, wow, that was kind of cool. Like the world has changed dramatically for me here.
Putting yourself out there, going for things that are uncomfortable. That's all about like that. That's how you get more innovative. That's how you level up. So I love all of that. You got so much great advice.
Well, I don't know about that, but the other thing I think too, and I don't know if, is the simple notion, and you probably tell all the authors you work with, is you're going to put some ideas out there, and not everybody's going to think they're the greatest ideas on the planet. And so you have to have a little bit of a tough skin about it. So you send your book out to get reviews and endorsements, and you don't know, what people are going to think. This last book I sent it out. I actually didn't send it out to many people. I kind of tried to pick. I waited 8 weeks and got an endorsement from Mel Robbins, who's reasonably popular. So that was really good. And I would say of the 22 people, I think 17 of them wrote a review or an endorsement, and four didn't respond. And then one guy said, "Oh, I don't like your book at all." So
Wow.
my view is it's like figure skating in the Olympics, right? And that is you're not going to please all the judges. That's why the high and low judge are discounted. In writing, you take it all personally, but you got to the next hour just move on. If you feel comfortable with what you've written and you put it out there, not everybody's going to resonate with it. I remember the
Hmm.
first book I wrote, which was called Lessons from the Sandbox, and it was a book about what companies and organizations could learn from small children about how to be innovative because kids are really innovative. Um, it like sold a lot of copies here. It was the best-selling book in Sweden and a number of other countries translated into their languages. And in the largest business newspaper in Japan, they wrote an op-ed piece saying this is the stupidest idea we've ever heard. What in the
Oh
world
my
could adults
goodness.
learn from kids? And a friend in Japan said, Alan, I'm glad to translate this for you, but it's really not pretty. And so I got that and I said, God, an entire country thinks I'm an idiot and it's a pretty important country. And then I just moved on and I'm going to speak in Japan later this year about different ideas. I'm not going to talk about kids teaching us stuff, but no, you got to have a thick skin too. And you probably tell the authors you work with
Yeah,
is you got to write what matters to you and it's not going to matter to everybody else.
that is so interesting. So Sweden loved it, Japan hated it, and you know what? We just move on. So
Well,
keep
yeah.
going.
Well, but think about it, and it made sense to me. In Japan, they're very hard charging about what they do. They separate work from the rest of their lives. In Sweden, Swedes get 14 months off a year paid to be with their kids. Kids are super important to them. And now even it used to be just the mothers could take all 14 months. Now they have to divide it up with the fathers. So you'll be at a park in Sweden and it's really kind of fun. You'll see all these dads with baby strollers. And that's kind of cool. But of
Yeah,
course, it was going to resonate because they spend a lot of time with their kids and they're
right.
seeing their kids growing. In Japan, it's like, okay, got to go to work,
So
and
it's knowing your target market. You're right. Like it doesn't
right,
matter what everybody thinks. You're not here to please everyone. You're not ever going to please everyone. So you're trying to write something that resonates with a certain group of people, and that's what you're doing. So that's great.
Right. No, and you're right. And so the more you know who your target market should be, then if you want to always be patted on the back, hang out with those folks.
Yeah.
And, if you're okay, hang out with a broader group of people and just be willing to kind of deal with the fact that not everybody's going to love your idea.
Yeah. Well, Alan, this has been so helpful. Thank you so much for joining us. I've learned so much, and it's always interesting to talk with another professional writer and hear.
Well, you're being kind. You're a professional writer, and I've written enough books that I guess maybe we can stretch the term to call me a professional writer.
You are. You can step into that role. You don't need imposter syndrome. You're doing great. You're a very successful writer. So, where can people go to learn more about you and stay connected?
Okay, great. Yeah, so of course they can go to alangregerman.com. And if you can't spell that, I'm guessing it'll be in the show notes. They can connect with me on LinkedIn if they want. They can certainly read one of my books. And I make this offer. I don't know if other people on your show do. If you buy one of my books and don't find it to be valuable, I will Venmo you whatever you paid for it, because I don't want people to be unhappy with my books. But you can read one of my books, connect with me, send me an email. My email, I'm sure, will be on the show notes. Glad to learn what you're up to. If you're another author, another semi-professional author like myself, I'd be glad, to talk with you, learn more about what you're doing. Yeah. So there's all those ways, I think.
Amazing. Well, thank you again for joining us. And for everybody listening, again, I'm Amelia Forzak. I'm the founder of Pithy Wordsmithery. You can find us at pithywordsmithery.com. And to quote Toni Morrison, if there's a book you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, you must write it.
Oh, I love that. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for listening to Sticky, Stories That Stick. We'll see you again next time. Be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.